Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning to our friends in Hawaii that are on. This is the error rate training for Year 3 states, and we're going to go ahead and get started. I know some people are still coming in, but we'll start with a couple of logistical items before we get into the main content. My name is Katie Watts, and I'm the error rate lead with the National Center on Subsidy Innovation and Accountability. And I'm here with some of my colleagues from NCSIA, as well as a couple of my colleagues from the Office of Child Care Central Office. Again, a couple logistical things. First, this webinar is being recorded. So if you would like to hear it again, or if someone on your team perhaps was not able to join today and they would like to hear it, please have them reach out to me. My email address will be at the end of the webinar. Please reach out to me and I can send you a recording. The second thing is that we have a few handouts. I did email them out to everyone about an hour or two ago. The handouts include the slides, a copy of the data collection instructions, and also a copy of the online data collection system access request form. These are also available through the GoToWebinar handouts box on your dashboard. And also, if you have any trouble accessing these, you need another copy, just go ahead and you can reach out to me too, and I'll make sure you get those. Last logistical item is that I'll be doing a lot of talking, but if you do have any questions at any point, feel free to use the questions box, which is also in the GoToWebinar dashboard. You can also raise your hand. I might not see that quite as quickly than if you just use the questions box, but whatever you feel more comfortable doing is fine. We'll stop throughout for questions. And we do have a full agenda today for the next hour. We're going to start with an overview of the error rate review. That's especially geared towards those of you who might be new to this process. And I would like to walk you through how to create the first of the two submissions, or sorry, the first two submissions for the error rate. These include the Sampling Decisions, Assurances, and Fieldwork Preparation Plan, or the SDAP for short, and the Customized Record Review Worksheet, or the RRW. And we'll be walking through these two in detail. And then before we say goodbye, I'll briefly touch on some next steps and how you can get some support as you begin the error rate process. So we're going to start with a brief overview of the error rate review. And again, if you've been involved in the error rate review in previous cycles, I do see a lot of familiar names on the attendee list. So this is going to be a refresher for many of you. For those of you who are new, what is the error rate review? It's a process by which CCDF lead agencies measure eligibility errors and improper payments in their programs. And this is done through reviewing a random sample of 276 case records to see if there are any eligibility errors. And then you will report on those you'll report on your findings, including the causes of your errors and improper payments, and your plans to reduce future errors. Each of the 50 states, plus Puerto Rico and DC, conduct the error rate review once every 3 years on a rotational cycle. We have 3 cohorts of states, and everyone on this call is in the Year 3 cohort. And you'll be reporting on your errors in June of 2025. And that report is based on case records that will be pulled from October 1st of 2023 through September 30th of 2024, so this fiscal year. That's what we refer to as the review period. So we are in that review period now. That's the period from which you'll be drawing cases, and then you'll report on your results in a little over a year from now. There are a number of steps to completing the error rate process, and I've kind of broken them down in this slide. The first step is to learn about the review by reading the data collection instructions, which we also refer to as the DCI. And the DCI includes all of the templates for the different submissions and instructions for completing the submissions, as well as instructions for sampling cases and conducting reviews. And like I said a couple minutes ago, the DCI was included in the email that I sent out before the webinar, and you can also get it in the handouts box here. Once you've familiarized yourself with the DCI, you can plan for your reviews by creating and submitting the SDAP. And that must be submitted by October 31st of this year. Then customize the record review worksheet template, and that is what you will use to conduct your case record reviews. And that must be submitted by December 31st of this year. Once the SDAP and record review worksheet have both been approved, then you can begin conducting your 276 case record reviews. Next step is to report the results of your reviews in that final report, which we call either the state improper payments report, or more frequently we just refer to it as the 404 report. And that must be submitted by June 30th of 2025. Finally, if you have an error rate that is above 10%, and when we say error rate, that refers to the percent of improper payments. So if you find that the percent of your improper payments is more than 10%, you will be required to create and complete a corrective action plan. And throughout this entire process, you can receive TA support from NCSIA, and we'll also hold a couple more training webinars between now and June of next year. During today's webinar, we'll be focusing on the second and third steps here, the SDAP and the record review worksheet. And later webinars will focus on later parts of the process. Before we move on to the next slide, I wanted to mention that the dates shown in this slide are the last dates to send these submissions. You certainly can submit earlier. In fact, some Year 3 states have already submitted and had their SDAPs and record review worksheet templates approved, and they've been able to get started with their reviews. There are some benefits to getting started early. Of course, it gives you more time to complete your reviews. You won't have any, issues rushing at the end. But also, if you start reviews during the sample period, you might be able to catch some of the error causes and address them with eligibility staff so that they might not recur in later months. So if you are able to start planning and preparing submissions early, we encourage you to consider doing so. Now we're going to dive into how to create the first required submission for the error rate review, which again is the SDAP. The SDAP contains your plans for sampling cases and for conducting reviews. There's a template with all of the items laid out. That can be found in the DCI and the data collection instructions. But when you go to submit it, it must be submitted using the online data collection system, or OLDC, and that's a website. And I'll be talking a little bit more about the OLDC in a few minutes. So if that's something that's new to you, don't worry, we will address that shortly. You cannot begin your sampling until the SDAP has been approved. However, you can begin working on the next submission, which is, again, the customized record review worksheet. That can be submitted at the same time as your SDAP. It can be submitted while we are reviewing your SDAP, or it can also be submitted after you're done with the SDAP. So the two can be worked on or submitted concurrently. The SDAP consists of 3 parts, and over the next few slides, I want to go through each of the items. First part is where the state records your sampling decisions. First item, you can see that you will be selecting 276 cases over the course of the year, and we want you to report the number of replacement cases that you'll be drawing per month. And replacement cases are drawn separately from, so you have your main monthly sample that's drawn. Replacement cases are going to be a few extra cases that you draw, and you kind of put them aside unless you need to use them if a case drawn from your regular sample is unavailable. We ask that you plan to select at least 3 monthly replacement cases, and you might choose more if you would like. If you do have reason to believe that you'll need to select a lot of replacement cases, like more than 10 per month, then we do ask that you share the reason for that, just so we have that on our radar. You'll select the box to agree that you will obtain approval from your regional office before using any replacement cases. And next, the last part of 1A is where you'll describe your procedures for collecting your sample. And Chapter 4 of the DCI includes more instructions on creating this response. Remember to mention that you'll be drawing the replacement cases separately from the main sample. One B asks for the name of the source of your random number generator, so you will be using a random number as part of your sampling process. And in the SDAP, you just need to share the name of the source here. You don't need to give any further information about it. A lot of lead agencies use the RAND function of Excel to get their random number, but you can use anything else. Some lead agencies have a function in their database to draw a random number, or you can even just use a website to get a random number. Any of those are acceptable, so just let us know what you're planning to do. The next set of items in the SDAP is 1C, and that asks about the frequency of collecting your sampling frames and projected start dates. First, you're going to select the frequency for collecting the monthly sampling frames. This isn't how often you're going to be conducting reviews, but how often you'll be sampling cases. Sorry, I'm tripping over my words a lot. If you choose other, you'll need to describe your plans in a comments box, and that will, if you select other in the OLDC, a comments box will pop up for you to go ahead and write down your answer. Down, you'll give a projected start date for sampling and a projected start date for starting reviews. You don't have to give us a specific date like April 2nd, 2024, but we do ask that you give a month and a year for both. We have seen in some SDAPs where the state or lead agency staff will just say, our projected start date is whenever the SDAP is approved, and we'll get started. But we would actually like to see a month and a year. And these are just projections. If your plans change, if you end up getting started a little bit later or a little bit earlier, that's fine. That's part one of the SDAP, the sampling decisions. And then part two is assurances. And I'm not going to read through all of these assurances right now, but we do ask that you go ahead and read it before you click on the box that you agree. Lead agencies are held responsible for compliance with these assurances, so it is important that you understand them before clicking your agreement. Final set of items in the SDAP is part 3, and this is the fieldwork preparation plan. In this section, you'll be describing your error rate team and plans to prepare for the review. To start, 3A is for identifying the project leadership. First, you'll give us the names, job titles, and roles of the leadership team. And to be clear, this is only asking for those whom you consider to be part of the project leadership, and we don't need a list of everyone that's going to be involved with the review. Share what their roles will be in the process, and then click on the box to show that you agree with the statement that the leaders understand the program and can ensure that timelines are met. Next, give the name and the job title of the person who's going to be certifying and submitting the final report, what we call the 404 report. We strongly recommend having a backup person, so you'd actually be giving 2 names here. Having a backup person that also has the capability to certify and submit, just in case the first designee is either out of the office, if someone needs to go in to work on the report or has any issues with the OLDC system, it's always good to have a backup. Three B of the SDAP asks for some information about your review team. And what we're looking for here is the description of who will be on the ground doing the case record review. So again, we're not looking for the entire group of people that's going to be working on the error rate review. It's just those that are going to be conducting the reviews. And you don't have to give us the names, but we would like some information about the composition of the team. Things like the name of the unit or the office from where your reviewers will come from. And we also like to see a breakdown of how many first level reviewers you're going to have, how many second level reviewers, and details like that are helpful here. Three C is on inter-reviewer consistency. And you're going to select the box or boxes that describe the methods you'll use to ensure inter-reviewer consistency. You must have some re-review of cases. So that box must be checked, and then we ask that you describe which cases are going to get a re-review. We highly recommend to re-review all of the cases that have an improper payment error and at least some of the other cases. So whatever you do decide, you're going to just describe that here. And these two are optional. but if you do check either the group discussion box or the other box, please be specific in your descriptions about how these actions contribute to inter-reviewer consistency. (3D) of the SDAP is all about error definitions, and we're going to spend a little bit more time digging into this item. In the SDAP, we ask the state to give 3 definitions. The first is a general error definition, which encompasses all errors that might be found in the review. Next, you'll give a definition for improper payment errors. In other words, eligibility errors that result in an improper payment. And finally, give a definition for non-payment or administrative errors. And these are the eligibility errors that do not result in an improper payment. So you'll be giving us 3 different definitions in your SDAP. I'll show a few examples of error definitions. This slide, I have a couple examples of the general error definition, so that first definition. And I'll read you the text on the top left. This is a good general error definition. An error is a violation or misapplication of eligibility policy or procedure governing the child care subsidy program, which may or may not result in an improper payment. This definition encompasses any error that might be found in the review, and it's clear that it's covering both improper payments and non-payment errors. Now I want to take a quick look at the top right. This definition says an error is any violation or misapplication of child care policies, rules, and procedures, including eligibility errors and intentional program violations from the parent or provider. Why isn't this a good definition? It's because of that last part where it mentions intentional program violations, and these types of errors are not included in the scope of this review. So if you were to submit your SDAP with a definition like that, we would send it back to you for revision. Next, I have a couple of examples of definitions for the improper payment errors. On the top left, we have any inaccuracy based on policy or regulation that impacts the subsidy amount paid to the provider. The difference may be positive or negative. So this definition is clearly referring to only improper payments, and it doesn't give any specific examples of error causes. You can do that in your example if you'd like, but if you do, just be sure not to be too specific or too vague. For example, taking a look at the definition on the right, an improper payment error refers to any payment that should not have been made, or a payment that was made in the incorrect amount due to miscalculation of income, miscalculation of cost share amount, or missing documentation. And the problem with a definition like that is that it gives some examples of the error causes, but it makes it sound like these are the only causes that you could have. And we know that there could be other error causes, like maybe the parent didn't meet activity requirements. I mean, that is not included here as an example. So if you do choose to give examples in your definition, just be clear that the causes are given are not the only ones that might be found in the review. Finally, we have administrative errors or non-payment errors. Looking at the left side, or the definition here on the left side of your screen, a finding that does not result in a change to the payment amount issued to a recipient or provider. And similarly to the last slide, we would like your definitions of non-payment error to be clear, that they are referring to errors that do not result in improper payments. And also, we don't want them to be too specific or too vague if giving examples. This one does not have any examples of causes. Let's take a look at a not so good example. Any violation or misapplication of law, regulation, or policy governing the administration of CCDF grant funds, regardless of whether such a violation results in an improper payment. The problem with this definition is in that last part, the underlined part, where it says regardless of whether such a violation results in an improper payment. This would make a good general error definition, but it's too broad. It's not specifically about administrative errors. In the data collection instructions, there are a few more examples of error definitions, so you might want to take a look at that if you would like to get some other ideas. For now, we're going to move away from definitions and back to the next part of the SDAP, which is 3E. And this asks about your plans for reviewing your state policies, procedures, and processes. First, describe your plan to ensure that the customization of your record review worksheet will use state policy in effect during the sample month. So here you'll want to consider whether there were or will be any policy changes during the review period, which again runs in this current fiscal year. If so, you might want to reference that in your response to this item. Next, describe your plan to ensure that reviewers will consistently interpret error. Here you might want to say something about how this will be built into your reviewer training. You can also think about your plans for ensuring ongoing inter-rater reliability, as you described in section 3B of the SDAP. Right, this next item, I know there's a lot of text here, but it is asking you basically asking you to describe how you'll identify whether to apply a pooling factor and how you'll determine what that pooling factor will be on your final report. This isn't a yes or no item. It's not simply asking if you'll be using a pooling factor. Instead, share how you'll get information about the pooling factor, regardless of whether you'll be using one or not. So who determines this? Is it there a fiscal person in your unit, or is it a different unit where you'd pull this information from? In your response, you can also share what you do know about the pooling factor. For example, what funds are included in the pool. You don't need to give the actual percentage here. We're just interested in how you find that information about the pooling factor, where you'll find that from. And in 3F, we ask about your information systems project responsibilities. There's a list of tasks, and you'll check off those that you accomplish in partnership with IT systems and staff. If there's anything else you would like to highlight that's not included on this list, you can check that others box at the end and describe. If any of the boxes above other tasks, if any of these boxes are not checked, then you'll need to describe how and by whom those tasks will be accomplished. And in the last part of 3F, describe the process to determine the annual amount of payments. And this is referring to all CCDF payments that were made for all children over the sample period. So it'll be a big number, and we just want to know how you'll be pulling this figure. Will you be getting it from a particular person or unit, or will you be pulling it from a system, or so on? All right, we're almost done with the SDAP. There's just a couple more items. The last set of items is 3G, case review logistics. And specifically, we'd like you to share your plans for what kinds of records will be reviewed. Are they electronic, physical, or both? And share how the records are handled during the review. And we say we're especially interested in the physical records, but if you will only be using electronic records, we still do want you to complete this item and describe how they'll be handled. For the next item, we'd like to know how you'll access needed documents that are stored by other entities. For example, if you receive referrals from TANF or Protective Services, or if your provider licensing information is stored outside of the lead agency, how are you going to access that information? And how will you determine that those requirements are met? Share where your reviews will take place. And finally, share your plans for organizing and maintaining your review files, including how they'll be stored after the review is complete. So that brings us to the end of the SDAP items. Right now, I don't see any questions or raised hands. I did want to just say that if you are new to this process and you will be working on the SDAP, it might help to pull up your state's SDAP from last cycle, kind of to serve as a starting point. If you are not able to access that SDAP from last cycle, you can reach out to us and we can send it to you. And of course, we are also able to provide technical assistance on completing any part of the SDAP. Mentioned the OLDC system, which is used for submitting the SDAP. It's also going to be used for to submit your 404 report. I mentioned that the access form to sign up for the OLDC, that was sent with the webinar slides, and it's also in the handouts box here. So whoever will need access to the OLDC would complete that form and return it to the regional office, and they will get you set up with access. At least one user from your state must have the ability to certify and submit, but we do highly recommend having a backup. And here is the address to access the OLDC website once your account is set up. If you require any assistance with logging in and using the OLDC, you can reach out to your error rate specialist and we can try to help you. If it's too technical and we can't really help with that kind of stuff, because we don't, I mean, I can't speak for everyone else on my team, but I know I don't understand really technical stuff. You can contact the OLDC help desk and the email for that is shown here. Right, at this time, we're moving away from the SDAP and into the next required error rate submission, and that's the customized record review worksheet. The record review worksheet, or again, when we print it out, when we type it out, we usually just say RRW. That's a standardized worksheet to assess the case record to determine whether eligibility was determined correctly and whether there was an improper payment. The record review worksheet consists of a series of elements, and each of those deals with a different area of eligibility. Each element contains 4 columns, which have a specific purpose, except for element 500, which only has 2 columns. And I'm going to actually show you the template so you can see what I'm talking about. So right at the top, I'm going to try and highlight it. This is an example of an element. This is element 100. And as you can see, there are 4 columns. And that is going to be how the whole worksheet is set up. There's just a number of elements, each with 4 columns. We have something here called the mid table, which we are not going to get into today because this part of the worksheet is not customized. But when we have a later webinar on conducting record reviews, we will go through how to use the mid table. And then the final element 500 only has 2 columns. So this is how the worksheet is set up. Of course, I showed you the template. That's kind of the starting point. Parts of the template kind of just stay as is. Other parts are customized by lead agencies to reflect your own policies and procedures. You can use any format to create your customized template and conduct your reviews. Some states use, or I should say a lot of states use a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet or an Access database. You must be able to provide a printed version of the worksheet that conforms to the template as found in the DCI. Your customized worksheet is not submitted via the OLDC. You can just email it directly to your program specialist in the regional office. And you cannot begin your reviews until the worksheet has been approved by the regional office. So after you have familiarized yourself with how the worksheet is set up and how it works, and you've determined the format you'll be using to create your template, then you can go ahead and start customizing. Column 1 of elements 100 through 410 is where you will add some policy citations or other requirements for the reviewers to refer to when assessing the case record. And I'll show some examples of this in a moment. Column 2 of elements 100 through 410, you'll add items that reviewers will complete to analyze the case record. You won't be removing anything from the template, and you will not be customizing anything in columns 3 or 4 throughout the worksheet. You won't be customizing anything in that mid table that I mentioned, and you will not be customizing anything in element 500. You might see my note here. I say do not remove anything from the template except the NAs in columns 2 and 3. And I'll quick show you what I mean by that. I know it probably doesn't make sense. So in our template, you can see that in columns 2 and 3 of each element, it says NA. And the reason for that is simply for 508 compliance. When you are creating your own template, these should be removed. And before I show you some examples, I wanted to give some general tips for customizing your record review worksheet. First, ensure that your column 2 items allow the reviewer to assess whether there was an error in the element and also to record how that was determined. So the reviewer should have a place to record any verification that was reviewed, how they determined there was an error or not. Next tip is to not include any items where the reviewer would be asked to record personally identifiable information, or PII, of clients, children, or providers. And this includes names, birth dates, addresses, workplace names, provider license numbers, and so on. Anything that could either by itself or in combination with other information identify someone. And we do take, client privacy we take it very seriously. If we receive any submissions or worksheets or anything else that contains PII, we must report it and we'll return it to you for resubmission. So it'll add some extra time to everything, and it's just, we don't really want to have to deal with that. So just please be careful not to include any PII on your submissions. Next tip is to include comment boxes in your customizations for column 2. Comments boxes are really great thing to have so that reviewers can record information that might not be captured by other items in the column. And finally, your worksheet should only include items that involve what we call front-end eligibility processes. And what we mean by that is that for the scope of this review, we are interested in what happens during eligibility determination or redetermination, authorization, and any subsequent eligibility actions, so any change reports. We don't want to see items that analyze what took place following eligibility and authorizations, such as payment processing or time and attendance. And those are what we would call back-end errors. So that's, again, something that we'll be looking for when we review your submission of your worksheet template. Now I'm going to show some examples of customizing certain elements of the record review worksheet. I'm not going to go through every element today, but the DCI does include examples and instructions specific to each element, so you can take a look at that in your own time. And as I go through these, keep in mind that these are just examples and your own state's customizations will look different based on your own policies and your specific eligibility requirements. Let's start at element 100. This slide shows what the template looks like for 100 with no customizations. On the top, you can see the 4 column headers, which should not be changed. Here's the boilerplate, which you would not remove or change anything in the boilerplate. And if you want to just take a really quick look at the boilerplate, you can see that this element is looking at whether the eligibility forms in the case file were present and complete and correct. Under the boilerplate is where you would add your customizations. So here you would add policy citations or other requirements. We ask that you make sure that all of the applicable components from the boilerplate are included in your customization. Here, the state has added some policy citations for application, assets, and certificate. All right, we're going to stick with element 100 and move to the next part of customizing, which will be column 2. Again, here you'd add items to help reviewers conduct a detailed analysis of the case record. Like in column 1, be sure that everything from the elements boilerplate that is applicable to your state is addressed here. And you can see that in this example at the top, the lead agency has an item asking whether there was a signed application. There's an item on eligibility notification, an item on asset declarations, and then an item on the child care certificate. Again, this is going to look different in your own state, but hopefully this can give you just an idea of what customization might look like. Just a couple of things to note here. You can see that for the assets item, there's an NA box, since in this particular state, this item did not apply to all clients. So if you're going to be using yes, no boxes in your customizations, we encourage you to include an NA box if there is an item that does not apply to all scenarios. Also, we have a comments box here, and that's something that we highly recommend for you to include in each element. And like I mentioned a few minutes ago, that's just so reviewers can add any information that's not captured by the other items in column 2. Columns 3 and 4 are not customized. You should not add or change anything in these columns. If you are working in Microsoft Word, you are allowed to add like a text field to the columns, or if you have an Excel document, you can add like drop-down options in column 4. But when the worksheet is printed, we don't want to see that anything like added or changed here. Next, I'm going to show an example of element 200, which deals with priority group placement. So this is where you would determine whether the client met criteria of any state designated priority group, for example, special needs or low income. And I wanted to highlight this element because for some states, they determine that this element does not really apply in their state because the priority group is not really looked at during eligibility because there is no waiting list. In your state, you might still look at priority groups even if there is no wait list. I mean, that is fine too. But if this element is not something that you are going to be analyzing during the review, we still do ask that it is customized. And here's an example. You can include in column 1 any policies that you do have about priorities or wait lists, even if you do not have an active wait list. And in column 2, you can just add a statement that the state served all eligible children during the review period. Right, one important thing to remember when creating your customized worksheet is to address any policy changes that might have occurred or will occur during the review period. Let's take a look at element 310. This is where the reviewer determines whether the client was a resident according to state policy. And in this state, there was a policy change that occurred during the review period. And this is addressed in the customization. It shows the effective date of the new policy. Two should also adequately address any policy changes that have taken place. So in this example of element 310, column 2, the reviewer has kind of 2 sets of questions about verifying residency requirements with the effective dates included. So for a reviewer going into this element, it's really clear which set of items are going to be reviewed based on the date. And I wanted to address a question that came in. It's a good question from Nancy Grant. If we can't add or edit the findings column, then what is column 3 used for? That's a great question, and we're going to get into this more in our next webinar, which will be a few months from now. I'm conducting case record reviews. But briefly, when the reviewer is assessing the case record, the reviewer will answer these items in column 2, and then in column 3, the reviewer will write up like a brief summary of the findings. So if there was no error, they'll just say like no error in the findings column. And if there was an error, then the reviewer would just briefly write up a little bit of information about the error, describe the error a bit. And you can see some examples of that in the DCI if you are interested in taking a look. I did want to spend a couple minutes on customizing element 410. 410, looking at the boilerplate, this is where the reviewer determines whether the eligibility worker subsidy amount is correct, and if it's not correct, whether there was an improper payment made to the provider. Be sure to customize column 1 by adding any policies or other instructions for reviewers. And in column 2, again, you're going to go in and customize this, but we're really looking for a few specific things here, more so than in previous elements where there's a lot more flexibility for states in the customizations. We need to see a place to record the eligibility worker subsidy amount and the reviewer subsidy amount. And there should be a place to record the difference between those two amounts if there is one. And also a place to record the sample month payment amount if there's a difference between those two subsidy amounts. And you can see there's also a comment box here. Some lead agencies do add other things here, which is perfectly fine, but this is like the minimum of what we would like to see. And that takes us to the end of our section on customizing the record review worksheet. Again, I know I mentioned this a couple times already, but if you want to get some more examples or some more guidance on customizing your worksheet, you can refer to the DCI. Throughout this webinar, I should have mentioned this a while ago, but I do have citations on the bottom of each slide for the page or pages in the DCI that correspond with the slide information. And when you are ready to start customizing your worksheet, again, I would recommend that you take a look at your state's worksheet from last cycle to get some ideas and kind of use that as a starting point. So we got a couple more minutes, and I wanted to spend a few minutes on some next steps for your year 3 cohort. Just a couple of reminders. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, these are the last dates for submitting your SDAP as well as your customized record review worksheet. So those dates are October 31st and December 31st, respectively. You're encouraged to send your drafts of your SDAP and record review worksheet to your error rate specialist at NCSIA before you submit them. And that just allows us to take a look at your drafts and provide any feedback on them, make sure everything is in there that needs to be. And if there's any problems, then you can kind of fix them before you do your submission, and it usually makes the whole submission and approval process go by a lot faster. So we highly recommend doing that. The error rate specialist here at NCSIA can help with, like I said, reviewing drafts before submission. We can help with, if you need any help with completing the SDAP items, any suggestions on customizing your worksheets, or if you need some help with accessing and using the OLDC, we are able to help with any of that. NCSIA also has an error rate TA website where we have an e-learning module. If you are new to the error rate, you might want to check that out. It just covers, it's an interactive module that covers the entire error rate process from start to finish. There's a few briefs on there on different topics related to the error rate. And there's also links to past webinars and links to the submission templates. So there's a link to that here on the slide. Contact information for the NCSIA error rate specialist is on this slide and it's broken down by region. And if you have any general questions or webinar, general follow-up questions from this webinar, you can go ahead and email me, Katie Watts, at kwatts@wrma.com. We do ask that you please copy your regional office on any email correspondence. Keep them in the loop with what's going on. And I am going to, before I sign off, I don't see any other questions. I'm going to hand it over to 80 in the central office, and I think you wanted to speak for a moment about the burden hour survey, was it?
Oh, thank you, Katie. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Katie, can you
hear you?
volume?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great, wonderful. Well, thank everyone for being here today. And thanks, Katie. I had mentioned I wanted to hop on and I'd completely forgotten. So to say hi, I really know many of you. I do work on the error review in conjunction with your regional office staff and have met many of you on joint case reviews. I just wanted to let you know that in the next few weeks, we will be sending out a survey to request some feedback on our current DCI error rate report. Specifically, we have some real targeted questions just about learning a little bit more about the burden of these reports, how long it takes to complete, and so forth. So there'll be more information to come. I had hoped we would have the day coming out this week, so it would be a helpful little tip, but we'll be sending it individually to the error rate folks at your state, requesting some feedback if you're able. Of course, it's completely optional, but we really hope that you will be able to complete that to give us a little bit more information about how we can improve our processes. And in general, of course, you can continue to give your feedback to us in any way you would like. We get a lot of great tips during the joint case reviews, during these webinars, during evaluations. So any areas that have come up periodically that you believe could use more guidance in data collection instructions or report questions that are confusing, anything like that. Informally, we're always open to that kind of feedback. So be on the lookout. We'll come to you via email in the next couple of weeks. Thank you, Katie, and thanks everybody for your hard work.
Thanks, 80. So yeah, at this time, it is almost 5 o'clock Eastern, so we're just finishing just in time. Thanks so much for joining us today, and I look forward to working with all of you on this process over the next about 14 months. As you hop off, there will be an evaluation that pops up, and we always find feedback really helpful, like 80 mentioned. And if you have any follow-up items, questions, you can include those on the on your evaluation. We'll make sure to follow up with you. So again, thanks for joining us, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.